So today we're going to run through, as advertised, other routes aside from grad schemes to get into journalism. My name's Jem. I'm the founder and director of Journo Resources. I also applied and did not get into a single grad scheme. I think I applied for every single one. I instead started by working at a local TV station, which was attached to a local newspaper, and from there kind of went to a small politics outlet, and the career has kind of just gone on from there with various different freelance bits. So I definitely have the experience of applying to all of them, not really getting anywhere, and it kind of working out okay. I'm also joined by Jack.
Hello, my name's Jack. I also do a load of stuff for Journo Resources, and I didn't apply for any grad schemes when I graduated. And so actually I have a load of experience of applying for other things or kind of creating your own kind of opportunities and getting into the industry in a very different way more than anything else.
Cool. So this is the first time we have done this session. Hopefully it should be really, really useful. I'm quite pleased with what we've got planned for you. But this is the first time we've done it. So we've set aside, the invite says 6 till 8. We'll see how long we get to. We do have all of your questions in advance. If you've pushed something in advance, we do have that, and we will try and get through as many as possible. We did have about 200 questions, so the chances are we might not get to everything, but we will try our best. Just to let you know, this is being recorded because there's a lot of people that couldn't make it live, so we're going to send this out to you afterwards, but that also means you don't need to worry about writing any notes or anything either. If you have any questions, or if you just want to chat to each other, there is a chat box at the bottom. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll try my best to kind of do 2 things at once, and do put any kind of additional questions in there, or if you just want to kind of introduce yourself, it'd be great to know kind of who we've got in, really. So to give you a brief structure of what we're going to be looking at over the next hour or two, first of all, we're going to talk about what types of jobs to apply for, and I've got some data that I've pulled out from our jobs board over the last 20 months, which I'm going to kind of run through with you. We're then going to do some exercises around CV skills and cover letter skills. We're going to talk a little bit about ideas, and then just some final tips that we've learned both from our experiences being on both sides of that hiring process, because another thing which I probably should have mentioned before is that we've both kind of been involved in both entry level and a bit higher hiring processes now, so hopefully we can kind of impart a bit of that knowledge to you guys.
But we wanted to kind of start off by talking about the kinds of schemes that you've probably applied for. We kind of assumed that if you're here with us this evening on this kind of generally quite cloudy Wednesday, that you probably applied for a number of grad schemes or are thinking about applying for grad schemes. And so what we'd really love for you to do is just put in the chat which schemes you have applied for or you're interested in applying for, and potentially why as well. If you're able just to click them on, pop them in the chat. We'll have a couple of minutes just to let you get around to those ones.
And just to say, the chat isn't recorded anywhere, so you don't have to worry about anyone else seeing that, but we will not move on until someone has told us a little bit about what they're applying for and what kind of stuff you're interested in. I'm going to take this as typing time.
Was it maybe some of the BBC ones, or here you go. Clara, the Times, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, FT, and a few others. You did the full set by the looks of things. The Telegraph one, the BBC, Channel 4. Congratulations on getting through a couple of rounds. That's really great. That's really good work.
For those of you who've just joined us, by the way, I've been letting people come in as we go. So sorry if I'm a little bit stilted at points. I'm doing the tech, but we're just kind of dropping in the chat what kind of things you have applied for or are interested in. Cool. Oh, I think we've had a few more in there, some civil service ones as well, the BBC.
The training report scheme. These are all probably names that I would imagine that if you didn't apply for them yourselves, you almost certainly kind of maybe looked at the applications or thought about applying or thought about when it kind of worked for you.
And moving on from that, I think Jack touched on this a second ago, but the other thing that we're really interested to know, I think a lot of the schemes you mentioned there are the ones that we might have guessed, but what we're particularly interested to know, and so we can kind of shape this session best around what you're interested in, is why you want to apply to those grad schemes. What is it that kind of appeals to them about you? So maybe it might take you a little bit longer to think of this, so maybe we'll give you a minute or two, but I'm really interested to know what it is about those schemes that makes you want to apply for them. You know, is it the training they offer? Is it the organization? You know, is it something else entirely?
Is it the prestige? Is it the, yeah.
Because we're going to go on and talk about some entirely different ways that you might have thought of or might have not of. But it'd be really great to kind of know exactly why.
Yeah, career opportunities mixed with good pay, brand prestige, training, yeah, salary. I like to think that as well, that what you can see from these people in the chat as well is that you're kind of in a group of people very similar to you, like, and you're in a boat with a group of people who are all kind of have gone through a very similar experience that you potentially have as well. Good training, salaried, yeah.
Cool.
Some that are open to everyone, not just grads, yeah.
So what I'm kind of taking from this so far is it looks like there's a bit of mix in the chat of, you know, training, mentoring, that's an interesting one as well, and the salary, and less of the prestige, I would say, probably. But those kind of three things. So if there's anything else that I've missed out, do feel free to keep putting it in. But what I wanted to show you, so I spent a bit of time yesterday going through the Journo Resources jobs board for the last 20 months. Also, sorry if you can hear, there is literally a plane going over the house right now, which is the most inconvenient time. But I went through the Journo Resources jobs board for the last 20 months. And I think what's particularly interesting about this is this maps exactly on to what you've all basically just said. We had basically about 4,000 people looking at the Telegraph's editorial graduate scheme. We had just less than that looking at the Daily Mail trainer reporter scheme. Basically everything in here. We've got the Women in Journalism internship program, the Economist internship, the Bureau's fellowships. Apart from 2 or 3 here, all of these are set schemes or internships that you've basically all kind of mentioned and highlighted as the things that you might be looking to apply for. Now, obviously, 3,922 people probably didn't apply to the Telegraph grad scheme, but you know, that is still quite a high number. If 10% of them did, that's potentially you fighting against, you know, 300-400 people. So that very much kind of, yeah, maps on to what you've said. And that's just where the competition is. And I think that's kind of interesting to be aware of in terms of those are the things that came on top out of the conversation that we've just had. And also the things that are backed up by the data. So what if we go and look at this the other way around? And I looked to try and find some of the least viewed entry-level jobs, again, over the last 20 months. And these were the things that came up towards the bottom. And immediately, I think what you'll potentially notice, the difference between these two slides is there is a huge difference between 4,000 people looking at a job and 42. Like, even if every single one of those 42 people who were interested in the local democracy reporter job applied, you are probably still competing with less people than any of those jobs which we saw a second ago. So we've got a couple of different things on here. There were a couple of local democracy reporter jobs. I kind of got bored with listing entry-level local journalism jobs on here because otherwise it would have just been a table of those. I don't think that was particularly useful, but there were dozens of those that weren't particularly well viewed or applied for. You can see quite a lot of kind of social video jobs or social media, both for us, locals, various different things, and also a couple of different things at kind of specialist outlets as well. And I think what's just most interesting about this, and why we're going to attempt to almost do the sell on some of these types of jobs, is just the complete kind of difference in the numbers means that there is, you know, massively less competition for these kinds of jobs if these are things that you are potentially interested in.
And these are all jobs that you could do. Like, I think this is what we're saying more than anything else, is that you have a big opportunity to, apply yourself to some of these jobs, and we'll kind of talk through like the kind of classifications of how these jobs kind of work in. But if these are things that interest you, these are jobs that you could definitely do.
Yeah, so all of these jobs I picked out here are jobs that will take entry-level people. Even the local democracy reporter ones, I know when they started, they were originally aimed for more kind of senior level roles, but these job descriptions specifically included a line that said we would be happy to take people who are more junior level if you are kind of exceptional. And I think that has started to appear in the last 2 or 3 years. It definitely didn't appear when they first started getting listed, but as you can see, the interest in them is not high. They are now willing and ready. I know of people who have kind of got those first off because the competition isn't there. So I definitely would say on those, don't kind of put yourself off. Broadly, these all kind of fall into 4 buckets, and I don't know if you kind of wanted to kind of talk a little bit through this, Jack, and how we've kind of categorized them into 4 different routes that you might want to think about.
Yeah, so broadly, some of the jobs that we found that weren't necessarily applied for, that you could definitely apply for and do if you wanted, broadly fell into local and regional jobs, kind of B2B and specialist jobs, social media and SEO and digital jobs, and kind of journalism adjacent jobs. And while these may not necessarily come up immediately when you're kind of thinking, or what jobs could I apply for out of uni, we actually just want to go step by step and talk through why these are all great jobs just for your first step into the world of journalism. So local and regional jobs may not be as glam as working for the BBC in Salford or something like that, but a lot of them will give you a level of structured training and help you through various parts of the NCTJ diploma. Because of the way that local newsrooms tend to be structured, you tend to be involved in a lot more areas than just your kind of immediate job you want. You have the ability to kind of set your own topic or beat in some areas, and your skills that you would develop from starting off a career in local journalism would really set you up for anything else you wanted to do in the industry. Your ability to find yourself a story or get close to a community and really understand what they value is something that is highly sought after. Plus, if you were outside of London, pints are a lot cheaper, which is a big plus. Also, it's worth bearing in mind that your work does still find itself onto national outlets. If you worked in one of Reach PLC's local newsrooms, you would often find your work being put on the Mirror's website. Other local papers, etc., also have ways of selling stories to other outlets as well. And so you're not just trapped in this little kind of bubble like you may have been 5 or 6 years ago.
And equally, I mean, when I was working in a local and regional newsroom, there was that discussion to be had with editors, and editors were a little bit more flexible about this might not be the place you want to stay. So if you would like to moonlight, a couple of nights a week working at Sky News or wherever it is, or you want to pitch something to a live blog, they're generally a bit more flexible in terms of, as long as you're not doing something that's competition, that still gives you that kind of prestige and demand. Cool. So moving on to B2B and specialist jobs. Now, these are typically some of the things that we find get the least applications of all. And I think part of this, I don't know, probably comes around the idea that people maybe think that you need to have knowledge of that specialist area before you start. But especially at an entry level, that's absolutely not true. A lot of recruiters that we speak to find it really frustrating because they say, here is a great opportunity in finance, automobiles, that's what you call cars. Yeah, cars. Cars, events industry, whatever it is. They say we're going to kind of teach you this as you go. And a lot of the case studies that we've spoken to knew nothing about finance, before they started or whatever it was. But it gives you a real opportunity to really build on that and really develop a specialism. Give your expertise and contacts in the area, which you can then transfer to another national or outlet. And in a sense, it's a better way to kind of get to that specialist role. You won't get lost in a national outlet where you're potentially, churning through a lot of different things, not necessarily getting the chance to build a specialism. And you can jump straight into that kind of, money reporter job or travel job or whatever it is that you're interested in, because you've managed to build that specialism for a couple of years. And typically they are also smaller teams, so you get the real chance to get that mentoring and the people that will be able to train you and kind of help you kind of progress within your journalism career. Also, often free pints with this job, as there are a lot of kind of trade events involved. So yeah, we are going on the hard sell on the free pints on this one. And there's also much less chance you'll be expected to work weekends in these kind of jobs as well. So those are B2B ones, and I genuinely would say these are the ones that we see employers the most kind of after regional jobs kind of struggling to fill. And just to clarify on B2B, so that's business to business. So these are the kind of magazines, not like, Closer or Positive News or any of those things. They're things which are specifically to another business audience. So it might be kind of like, I used to work in a fish and chip shop, for example, and there used to be the Fish Fryers Weekly. That's a very niche example, but there are, publications specifically for chartered accountants. There are publications which are tailored to, people who make cars. I'm probably coming up with really naff examples, but it's that kind of thing. Those kind of areas, and also it's a lot more robust in terms of their business model, typically, not always, but you'll find you typically get a bit more job security, and the pay is generally probably better in most cases than what you might get on a grad scheme as well.
But the skills are all the same. Ultimately, if you've just graduated from, some sort of, or you've been interested in journalism and you've done a bit of journalism potentially, that skill set that they're looking for is the same. It's whether you can write, whether you can tell a story, whether you can get contacts and work there. These are all transferable skills that when you come to maybe looking for a second job in the industry, once you've got a bit more experience, that are all valuable and an employer would look for. Next in the bucket are social media, SEO, and digital jobs. This is what I did. I worked for many years in Metro's newsroom as I worked on their social desk as a social media executive. I ended up at the Evening Standard as deputy head of social, social editor, and I ended up at the Sun as well as deputy head of social through that kind of path. These are jobs where are actually really hard to hire for, I will be honest. Like when I've been in the position where I've been hiring for a team or a social media team, on and in a newsroom, there aren't a lot of people who have had the kind of intuition and skill set needed in order to get to that far. And so you only need to have done a little bit of experience or only shown a little bit of your own intuition in order to get yourself to the top of that CV pile. That's the thing I would say. There are plenty of other advantages. You don't necessarily need to churn out lots of stories a day. You are in the newsroom itself. And so in particular, if you are looking to write more, or you're looking to do other kind of journalism jobs, actually being in the newsroom already is a great way to move around the business. You meet all the people, you make your mark on the business, and you end up in another role once you've kind of negotiated yourself into something else. And there's also there's in general fewer kind of layers of the rung in between you and the boss, and so if you're looking to move quite quickly through a kind of seniority in career, there's a real opportunity there. And fundamentally, from my point of view, the real advantage that the people that I worked with in those newsrooms had is that they really knew how to tell a story, because if they could tell a story in 150, 140 characters for a tweet, they could almost certainly tell a story when they got longer to write with it. And Clara, to your point around previous marketing experience help for social jobs, I think it would. Like ultimately, if you're doing a marketing piece, you are trying to think about why someone would want to consume a product, or why someone would be interested in the thing you're doing. And the question when it comes to selling a story on social media is basically the same. And actually, the other thing I would say is the jobs go the other way. I now work for the Lego Group, and when I joined the Lego Group, I joined their social media team creating social content off the back of doing social content in a newsroom. And so those two worlds aren't as close as aren't as far away as you think they are, and the transferable skills are really highly there. So those entry level social media, SEO, digital jobs, are super sought after, and if you've got a little bit of experience, those are the kind of jobs you can find yourself getting interviews for and getting. do you want to talk about this one? I can talk about this one. And then we're kind of talking about journalism adjacent jobs in this case. So these are, to your point around marketing, these are the kind of things you were talking about there, where you might be in a marketing role or a PR role or something like that. And I think a lot of the time when you suggest this to someone who has maybe just spent a lot of money on a journalism MA, or has just spent 3 years of their life studying it in uni, or is really passionate about it, to suggest something like this is often kind of seen as like a, you know, as we're giving you the terrible, you know, the worst ideas possible. The thing I would say about this is that we're all going to be working for a very, very long time. Just because you start off doing a job in PR or marketing does not mean you can never go into journalism ever. There are plenty of roles available in this kind of area where you can get kind of real experience. There's often there's often opportunities to still be allowed to write kind of journalistic pieces or pieces on the side, as long as there aren't a kind of conflict of interest involved. And the UK scene is very different to how it is in America, where, you know, in a lot of American newsrooms, if you have gone to PR, they will never speak to you ever again. You know, if you're looking to get into those more PR-y end of journalism, you know, travel journalism, events journalism, things like that, music journalism even, you're not that far away, and you're in the network of people that you would want to be meeting as well.
Awesome. Sorry, that was me attempting to get some people in who hadn't quite got the right link, whilst also not managing to present. So thanks, Jack, for covering. So we've also got a couple of case studies here, because I appreciate this is basically just us going, hey, have you looked at these jobs? Please, you should apply for these jobs. These jobs are great. But I also wanted to show some case studies, because I think it's really important to kind of see how this actually works in practice. And it's not just us saying that maybe you could do this and this might work, but I wanted to show how it also can lead to the kind of jobs that you might potentially be thinking about more long term. So a couple of examples. Tanyelle recently got a job, her first kind of staff job, as a lifestyle reporter at metro.co.uk. So, you know, one of those really great jobs where you actually get a lot of freedom to kind of report on the issues that you care about and have a bit of time to do kind of your own investigations. And previously to that, she was working SEO shifts at The Sun. Again, completely different, but, you know, she really would advocate this kind of as a route in. She did a couple of internships, work experience to get those shifts. Sons had got that under her belt, but that was really the thing that she found gave her that kind of in to get into the newsroom at the Metro. And I think also what's interesting here is not necessarily related, but those kind of SEO and social media skills do actually really tie into whatever job that you're potentially looking to go for, because you really understand how to kind of sell yourself to that audience. And also she said it actually helped her figure out what she actually wanted in a permanent job. And I think that's worth saying as well. As Jack kind of just said, you're going to be doing this, you know, for a while, even if it isn't necessarily your dream job to be working in journalism about the events industry forever. Doing it for 12 months might help you kind of get that platform to something else and kind of move you on. I had another couple of examples. This is George Nixon. He's a money reporter for The Times. He gave me a really long quote. He also said that he's only just moved to The Times on the paper, and his editor keeps telling him that he needs to cut down on his writing and be more concise, and his quote reflected that, which I'm sure he won't mind me saying. But, you know, he said he knew absolutely nothing about finance before he applied to some shifts. He saw them at the Mail Online's thisismoney.com website. He'd previously applied to all the grad schemes, got nowhere, spotted some shifts for This Is Money on LinkedIn, applied knowing nothing about finance. They kind of said, you know what, not a lot of people have applied, you look great, let's give it a go. He did a good enough job and was enthusiastic enough that he kind of got through those first few days, and they offered him a full-time role pretty much straight away. It allowed him to develop a niche and a specialism, and from that, he got offered the next job as a reporter at The Times, which I think a lot of people would probably say is a dream place to work. And, you know, the advice that he also wanted to add on was that do just be open to things you might not initially think are for you. He knew nothing about finance, but thought, I'm just going to try it. This could be my into a newsroom, and it worked. And then
there's a question in the chat actually about shifts. As a, what are shifts?
Yeah. Do you want to take it? You started.
Yeah, may as well. So you know, a lot of news desks will need a bit of cover every now and again, and they will pay you on a kind of freelance basis to come and, you know, by a day, you know, doing a day shift effectively. So you'll be in the office for the day, you get paid a day rate, so X amount per day. And it'll be either freelance, sometimes that can be paid through PAYE, and I certainly, when I was starting out, when I was in BBC, working for BBC Local Radio as a broadcast assistant, I was kind of freelance and casual, and would get called up and said, can you come and work on Sunday, and you just filled in a timesheet. So it's kind of like being freelance, but you're there in the newsroom for a day, more than anything else. That's probably the best way of putting it, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. And then to take the other question that we've got around what does a job as an SEO writer involve? So SEO basically stands for search engine optimization. So it's basically looking for stories that are going to kind of rank well in Google, or, you know, Apple News, or any of those kind of things, that you're writing stories about things that people might be searching for. So to a certain extent, half of the job might be kind of those stories that are a little bit more kind of, you know, they're not really investigative journalism. It's more kind of, you know, potentially writing about the Love Island final, or, you know, has there been, you know, something that people are particularly searching about in the news over the last few days? Are you writing an explainer? But it also might be kind of helping other people in the newsroom, advising them by saying, okay, you're writing about this, here's how you could best phrase it. I would definitely say it's one of those things a little bit like social, where you were saying that it is kind of one of those things that is people really struggle to hire for. So I wouldn't let it put you off if you don't really know what it is. It basically is just the process of writing stories that are easy to find for search engines, whether that's kind of like an aggregator like Apple News or Google or whatever it is, and kind of helping other writers kind of do their best. And it's definitely something I think you would get training on the job. And that's kind of, yeah, that's kind of the process, I think.
Is Geronimo still alive? You know, those kind of articles.
Basically, yes. And then the final kind of case study that I kind of got in advance, this is Jerry Scott. She's the political correspondent at PA. Previously to that, she was the political correspondent for the Yorkshire Post. But she basically started out by working, she basically got a reporter job at the EDP, which is the Eastern Daily Press in Norwich, and basically worked her way up from there. So she started as a reporter. I don't think Jerry had even done her NCTJ at all. So a couple of people asked in the questions about the NCTJ diploma, which is kind of like the short course diploma training that you might want to consider if you want to work in a kind of news capacity, especially if it's going to be something at a local, regional, or kind of national on the news side. But she managed to get a place at a local, again, because there are so few people looking for these jobs. Occasionally they'll sponsor you even from the start. They trained her up, gave her her NCTJ first diploma, got her through her seniors, and then she was able to specialise. I think she became health correspondent first, and then she became health and politics, and then was able to end up finally at the Press Association. So that means her copy literally appears in every single national newspaper. So she's got bylines literally everywhere. And she is such an advocate of, you know, local opportunities as a really good route, because you just have to do everything. There aren't enough staff, but she thinks that's kind of like a advantage, in that you get trained really quickly, and you just don't get lost in the newsroom where you have to do all the terrible jobs. You can kind of get to do a little bit of everything, and it's just genuinely really good fun to really be part of a community. And I think the news landscape has shifted a little bit as well, in that, you know, we are realizing slowly that the media, I say we all know this, I'm sure, in this room, that the media is too London centric. And so actually national newsrooms are looking for people who can tell those stories from around the country, and I think gives you a good kind of, you know, grounding in that. And this is just 3 examples. You know, there are so many other people who haven't done grad schemes and have still kind of got really good jobs, the kind of jobs that you know you might aspire to, and kind of link quite well to the stuff that we were talking about right about the start, about what kind of places you were applying to schemes at. I saw the other day as well, I think Sophia Smith-Gaylor off of TikTok tweeted that she'd, you know, applied to the BBC grad scheme, I think 2 or 3 times, didn't get in, and her first break was she got a social producer job at the BBC, and that was how she got in. So it wasn't a journalism scheme at all. She kind of applied through that way.
So I think we've got small mountain of content still to go through, but we would love to maybe take some questions if you had any kind of questions about that kind of piece. We're going to go through a variety of other steps about how you apply for jobs and a load of other stuff, but we really wanted to get your kind of reaction to, I guess, our pitch to you almost, which is that grad schemes are not the be all and end all. And if you feel like you wouldn't get a proper job, if that's the phrase you want to do it, we would say that you can, because you have got the skills and you have learned them likely. And so we'll talk about what you should put in terms of applying for jobs in a moment. But if you have any questions, put them in the chat. You've been pretty good at putting them through, and we can take a few now if that's easy.
Yeah, so what we've got coming up, just so you know, while I'm sure a few more questions will probably trickle in, we have got specifically CV and cover letter skills, and we're going to talk about ideas and how you can use that in your job application and about the process. But yeah, any questions that you have, either if you think we haven't solved those to you enough, is there something that you're like, that's a sticking point that you'd like to know? Any questions on that kind of area, now is your chance to ask. Couple of questions in already. The NCTJ has come up twice already. So again, I think a split between us in that I applied for the grad schemes, you didn't. I have an NCTJ. I don't think you do.
No, I don't. No.
My personal view in terms of the NCTJ is it really depends on what you are looking to do. I think typically if you are looking to if you're looking to go into hard news, if you're looking to kind of do things that will require like court reporting, all of those kind of skills, or you're kind of going to be in kind of a position of actually publishing something quite hard and newsy onto a website, that is something that people are going to look for. I think that's more relevant in local newsrooms and regional newsrooms. It's less relevant if you want to be a feature or opinion writer. You definitely wouldn't need it if you were kind of, I wouldn't say anyone's going to ask you for it for a social or a kind of SEO job as a requirement. But equally at the same time, I would say that, having told you that 47 people looked at that local job, I think there is a kind of there's occasionally a scope for saying, hey, I'm great, here's all the news I've done, will you train me up kind of while we go? So I would say the starter question for me is, what kind of jobs do you want to do? If it is quite heavily newsy and that's what you want to do, probably is worthwhile doing that, and it's newsy and kind of print/online, it's different for broadcast. If it's that bucket, probably worth doing, or kind of making the argument to someone that you'll kind of be trained on the job. I don't know if you have anything more to add on that kind of NCTJ.
No, I think so. I mean, to the point, the question, I can't quite see it if you scroll up, saying you had a degree but haven't studied journalism, but spent 3 years in student media and does not having an NCTJ be a sticking point for you applying. So out of uni, I had, during my student media times at Leeds University, I created an iPad app for the Leeds student newspaper. And my first job out of uni was as a sub-editor on Metro's iPad app. And I got that job out of the work that I'd done at my student paper. They never asked for a NCTJ at any point. They were more interested in the experience that I'd had and the work that I'd done at my student newspaper, and that's why they hired me in that job. And so I think it's really about it's about the package that you have. And I think if you think about what we showed you earlier about the low numbers of people applying for some of those jobs, some of those newsrooms aren't in a position to be as fussy as you think they would like to be. And actually, some of those newsrooms aren't going to be as fussy about something that is really just a tick box exercise. And actually, to the point of Jem's example around Jerry, if that was a real sticking point, they did pay to put her through a degree, a level of training.
And I think also some of it is, I think it's always a really valid question, and it comes up so often around the NCTJ. But what I would say is, you don't want to be talking about in an application what you don't have. What you want to be talking about is what you do have. You want to have already sold them that you're great. So if you've got loads of examples from student media, you can say what you studied at uni, and maybe that touched on a bit of law, or you did some tricky stuff and you've done some hard news stuff. Sell them on that, and then they're going to want to then they're going to want to have you. And if they've only had 10 applications, but you're great, they're going to want to find a way to make that work.
And there's some questions down the bottom around as well from Clara around, do you think it's possible to move from the Sun to a more hard news role? I mean, I moved from the Sun, which is, controversial if you want to, give it any sort of label, to Lego, the friendly brick company. I don't think that move is any different to moving from a tabloid newspaper to, a more hard newspaper. And I think actually, ultimately, people within the industry tend to kind of respect the work and respect the hustle as much as anything else.
I think a couple of other things I would say just off the top of my head. I would definitely say one of the things I was told and didn't necessarily know if was true when I was doing my journalism degree is that there is a lot more movement between those titles than you think. Just off the top of my head, the deputy political correspondent at the I paper came from the Sun. I have a few more in my head. I can point you to them later. But if you look at if you actually look at some of the people working in newsrooms, like I said, Tanyel went to metro.co.uk, which is quite a left-leaning kind of online outlet. I don't think it's going to hold you back if you're looking to go into those other still fairly established newsrooms. Obviously, if you want to go and work for Left Foot Forward, maybe that's something a little bit different. But if you're looking to work for quite an established newsroom, I think there is kind of a fair bit of kind of movement between those. There was a question which I saw a little bit earlier on, and we'll take these kind of last one or two and then we'll kind of move on because I'm conscious of time, but we will have another, I think we've got another 2 breaks for questions, so don't panic. I saw one a little bit earlier on about how to actually kind of apply for shifts. We do actually have a workshop around that, so I will just share some of the resources from that a little bit later on, so I can share you a couple. For me, it's very much been a process of literally just finding an editor, sending them an email on the off chance. And typically times such as the summer and Christmas are great times to try and get an in. Think of when people are going to be on holiday. And I will send in the kind of resource pack that we send you. I'll send a couple of examples where I have successfully pitched myself for shifts, and they're really simple emails. And it's just a case of reaching out to people and saying, hey, here's me. Are you interested? But I'll make sure that everyone gets kind of a copy of that. So what's this one kind of final question at the bottom? Someone is currently working full-time in comms as a graduate of 1 year. Could this help me get into journalism? And what advice do you have on changing careers?
I think it certainly could help you get into journalism, but I think also it's maybe worth you thinking about the kind of skills that you might not be getting in your full-time career, I guess, and maybe thinking about things that you might want to be doing in your spare time to help bolster that CV when it comes to applying. Then people are more likely to be looking at your experience than kind of where you are or what you're necessarily doing. So it might be that you need to bolster that comms work with a piece, with a bit of kind of blogging on the outside, or a general bit of reporting for, somewhere else, I guess, that kind of thing. I actually got my first break in the media from working on a community radio station, which is a kind of, there's community radio stations in the UK are entirely volunteer run. They're normally charities. They're kind of like student radio, but a little bit more professionalized, or run by, grown-ups, I guess, rather than students, if that's the phrase you want to use. And so it may well be that actually if you were in a comms job and you wanted to get into radio, there are opportunities for you to find, kind of creative outlets that will help you kind of gain that bit of experience.
Awesome. Right. I think we will come back to the next question around kind of what other things you can do a little bit later on, because we do have a specific section around kind of experience and making your own experience. So we'll definitely come back to that in a bit. I wanted to move on to applying for jobs and some kind of skills around there. So we've kind of hopefully given you a little bit of inspiration around the things you might want to consider applying for that you hadn't anymore, and kind of shown you how there is much more chance of success simply by a numbers game, and you all being great already. So now we wanted to actually talk around some of those skills around applying and how to make your application stand out. The other thing I was going to quickly say before we started, just because a couple of people have mentioned kind of transferable skills, if people would be interested in a kind of a separate workshop later in the future, specifically around transferable skills, if you're in a kind of related industry, it'd be really great to get some feedback in the chat, because that could definitely be something we could put together. If let me know if that sounds useful. But so, applying for jobs. I wanted to start off by talking about CVs, and then Jack's going to go on to talk about cover letters, and then we're going to go and talk around ideas that you can kind of bring into these. So to start off, I have just got a bog standard, basically entry-level CV, because we're talking about grad schemes here. And I want to hear from you again in the chat. Don't think too much about it. I want to know what's right and wrong about this CV. Anything that you think is good about it, anything you think is bad about it, anything you think surprises you about it. Just chuck it all in the chat. And then in a minute or two, we can kind of discuss what those kind of key points are to make a CV better. And obviously this is an entry-level CV, but the kind of stuff that we are going to go through and talk about is kind of the building blocks for any CV. So even if you're kind of actually thinking, oh, you know, I already work in comms, so maybe this isn't quite as relevant to me, you know, we will touch on stuff that hopefully is still relevant. So yeah, anything about the CV that you think is either right, wrong, surprising, not surprising. We've got a couple trickling in, so I'll give you a couple of other.
Samuel's got some good ideas.
Has Samuel been to a Journo Resources workshop before? Potentially Samuel has.
Hang on, have you got like a thing? Have you got a typo in there as well?
There's typos on purpose.
Oh right, sorry.
Cool, right. Yeah, there's loads of stuff coming in. Give you a couple more seconds. Just anything you can think of that is kind of good, bad, whatever. And the thing that I would also say is a lot of the stuff you're saying absolutely hits what we're going to mention and kind of run through in a second. But as someone who has hired, I can tell you for a fact that like some of these things 90% of people don't do, and it must seem like one of those things where it sounds like you're stating the obvious, but as someone who has hired and gone through 200 CVs for a role, I can tell you that a lot of these things don't actually happen. And if you just do kind of like, you know, what seems like the obvious, but do it consistently, you really will kind of jump quite a way up. There is, I'd probably say, around 50% of CVs that don't do, you know, all of the obvious. So there's a good selection of stuff in there. So I'm just going to go through what I'd picked out, and then we'll kind of check that matches up what you've said, which I think it broadly does. Experience always above education. I mean, it perhaps is pretty obvious in this context because this person has quite a fair bit of experience, but I would say, you know, even if you've only got kind of 1 or 2 bits where you've been a volunteer somewhere, or even if you don't feel that it necessarily kind of matches, I definitely would say for journalism as a career, you want to put your experience at the top. Pretty much every job that you apply for will be saying, oh, we want you to have A levels, or we want you to have a degree or whatever. That's not what makes you stand out. What makes you stand out is the experience that you've done. So I would definitely say put that at the top. Similarly to, as you've all said, I would get rid of everything but your highest level of kind of education. If you've done a degree, your A levels don't matter. If you've done A levels, your GCSEs don't matter. They obviously mattered to get you to that next stage, but ultimately they were just a vehicle to get you further on. The only exception I would probably say to that, if you've done a degree and an NCTJ, for example, but I would definitely cut down on that because it's a really bad use of space for something that is actually pretty standard. A lot of people have A levels who are applying to these things. A lot of people are going to have a degree. That's not what makes you stand out. What makes you stand out is the experience that you have. So be absolutely ruthless with that. The other thing I kind of put on here is a bit of a trap is the hobbies at the bottom. This person says they create their own Instagram page, which covers fashion news in their local area. I would definitely say, we're going to talk again a little bit about creating your own experience later. Jack alluded to the fact that he got his first job from making an iPad app for his student newspaper. If you're treating your hobby or your side hustle as, you know, a professional thing, there's no reason why that can't be something that goes into your experience as kind of a professional bit that you can kind of add in. In terms of skills, a lot of these, I would say, cut. Don't say that Microsoft Office. I can tell you can use Microsoft Office. You sent me a CV. I would say that if you are going to include skills on your CV, you want to be quite specific about them. You want to make sure that they are things that, are perhaps like, can you speak a language? Is it, that, don't just tell me that you can use social media. What can you use? Is it that you can schedule using TweetDeck or Buffer, or you're quite good at Instagram, or whatever it is? Make sure that that's quite specific, because otherwise, again, it just feels quite generic. And a lot of people will tell you that they're good at news reporting, but that doesn't necessarily make it stand out. So always make sure that every bit of this is working for you and making you kind of bring something different to the table. And just generally, thinking about how best to utilize this space, I think is really interesting. I mean, on this CV in particular, even if we put the experience at the top, there's still not a lot kind of at the top that would necessarily kind of sell it. It's great that you've got your your professional contact details there, and you've got your kind of LinkedIn and your phone number and all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, that is the top left hand and the top of the page are the bit where people are going to look first. So do you want to dedicate all of that space to just contact details, or do you actually want to give a bit more space to all of the experience and the amazing things that you've done? And one of the things I would typically say to do is, I would say actually the test of a good CV is cover up the bottom 2/3 and be like, okay, if I was an editor, is this top third enough to make me interested in me as a person? Does this kind of sell me enough for a job? And you really want that kind of top bits of experience at the top, and just making sure that all of those bits that will be looked at first really, really do sell you.
My favorite thing about this CV as well, I don't know if any of you recognize this CV, but this is one of, I think, Microsoft Word's generic CV templates, which you think might look fine, might look nice. But you won't believe the amount of people who use this template. Like we had, when you hired...
It was about 20% of people, I think, use this template for one of the jobs that we hired for.
Yeah. And so think about like that. How are you supposed to stand out on this piece of paper if you're using the same template as everyone else? And I think, that is something that you just might not realize, because when you're throwing together your CV quickly and you open Microsoft Word, or you open, Google Docs, and you go, give me a CV template, and you think that one looks pretty, that's great. But just have a consideration to how many, literally millions of people around the world might also be using that template, and the chances of them coming up, applying for the same thing that you are.
Yeah, and I think it's also just about like, don't overly think about the design. It needs to be clear and it needs to be concise, and you need to make sure that you have the most important bits in the most important places. But you don't have to worry too much about a design, because I think in this instance, this design takes away from what this person has done. So I would say, just don't stress too much about making things fancy for the sake of it. I'll show you some examples of designed CVs in a bit, but you don't have to do that. Like, you don't have to do that to kind of make it work. And you can absolutely just keep it plain, as long as it's clear. I've skipped past the bits where about bullet points, but I'm also a big fan of bullet points. That again just breaks it up and makes it easy to read. The key things are keeping it clear and easy to read. When people, I think, told me before that you hear these ridiculous statistics around someone's only going to look at your CV for 7 seconds. And I think when you think about that, you're like, what? Like, I put all this time into this job application. Why is someone only looking at this for like a couple of minutes? When I did my last round of hiring for the Journo Resources Fellowship, it took me 4 working days just to open and look at every application. And that was me kind of, trying to be good. So that kind of actually, maybe it's not a statistic to scare you, but it's just to say, like, actually think about how little time someone potentially will have to look at this. So just make it really easy for them to see what they want to hear. So put stuff in bullet points, put the important stuff at the top. It doesn't have to be fancy. There's a worry if you over fancy it for no reason that it is going to detract from all the great stuff you do. You just have to make it easy for them to know, like, what's good and what's great about you. And when I say personalize your CV every time, on this little kind of checklist over there, what I mean by that is don't put in the same kind of words on the CV for every job. Don't assume that the person who's going to be looking at your CV at the same time as your cover letter. I think you did a round of hiring recently where you got sent them separately.
Yeah. And sometimes they might be separate, sometimes they might not be apart. And so think about your CV may need to also kind of stand on its own outside, away from the cover letter or away for the rest of the things. April, to your question around, is it a bad thing to mention a bad grade?
I just wouldn't include it. Just say you did A levels.
I don't think anyone's even looking at grades in reality. Like if they're looking for your experience and they're looking for what you want, but they're certainly not getting as far down, because if you've got a stack of 200 of them, you're having to make a very quick decision about people that you might want to take to interview. The job of the CV in your application is to get you to an interview. Like it's got to get you through that door, and everything else you do beyond that, about proving what you can do or who you want, or who what you can do and who you are, will do everything else. This bit of paper is just to get you over the threshold in the first instance.
And I would just, if you need to put your education in at all, you can just put the school, what things you studied, that's at the bottom. They're already sold by the time they get to the bottom or not. So I would say, wouldn't stress over that. A couple of things this CV did do right it's one page. Do not go over one page. I think, if people who are 10 years into their career can fit into one page, you are all able to fit it into one page. And also I think it shows good self-editing, that you're able to kind of pull that together and know what is important and what isn't. It might be that you want to have a master CV, so you have one that's really long that you kind of keep on your computer and you kind of pick and choose what's best. But each time, just pick out what is most relevant to each job, and kind of tweak that and make sure it reflects the keywords that are in the job description. I've seen two questions actually, in the chat around kind of good personal profiles / objectives. As someone said earlier, would absolutely take aspiring out. And I think this also kind of, I'm a bit ambivalent about whether or not you need an objective / personal profile. The only thing I would say is if you are going to include one, that is definitely one thing that needs to be personalized to a job. It just stands out. I think one of the reasons I used to hate them is it just stands out like a sore thumb if it just is hey, I'm looking for opportunities in X, Y, and Z. If that's the thing at the top and you haven't personalized it to say something like, I'm a reporter with experience in health and features, and this is what I could kind of bring to you in 1 or 2 sentences, that really stands out. So have them or not depends on kind of whether a good reason for having one, for example, might be that there's something further down your CV that you do really want to highlight at the top. So there are some good reasons for having them, but definitely make sure you personalize them. And I would say that if you are using them, that's the kind of key bit for me. And the other final thing that I wanted to add on this CV is that it doesn't include a picture, and that is great. You should never really I think it's just giving an excuse for someone to kind of go, oh, is that the kind of person I would like to go to the pub with or whatnot? You don't need to do that. And also it just takes up a load of space. It's not relevant to your experience at all. If you're finding it stressful to write a personal profile or objective, I would say just don't do it. I mean, do you tend to have them on your CV or? So
I would personally when I apply for jobs, I use that space for written words, I guess, or like a paragraph or two, to actually really just back up what I've maybe written in a cover letter. I almost treat it like a mini cover letter in a paragraph, on the assumption that at some point in the application process, a hiring manager or someone in HR might only be looking at my CV and might never look at my cover letter in the same way. So I actually treat it more like that and tailor it to the application, and will write it in that kind of manner, rather than talking necessarily about me. It's talking more about my experience or what I would like to bring to the job, because I just see it more as an opportunity to say some words in a very direct way to whoever is going through the stack of 200.
I think that's a good way to approach it as well. That was kind of almost what was being formed in my head. Treat it as a mini cover letter, and I think it can feel more stressful if you're kind of thinking about it as this has to sum up me as a whole, whereas actually it's just about you and this job. I've also mentioned show not tell here, and I think someone earlier on in the comments was talking about skills and kind of how to sell those and whether there should be more stats. So I wanted to just kind of these are two very basic examples of what I mean about show not tell on that CV. But this is one of the things, I mean, I don't know about your experience of looking through job applications, but this is a thing that just never happens. I never see it. I see probably about 10% of job applications actually do this, especially in their CV. People will quite often, remember that they have to come up with an example in their cover letter, but very rarely seem to remember to do it in their CV for some reason, which is bizarre. So, rather than saying, as an editorial assistant, I write features for the website on a weekly basis, tell me, how tell me what features you've written. You can hyperlink in that PDF CV. I would always also recommend it being a PDF so that things don't jump around, because you can't bank on someone having the same software as you. But say recent pieces include an interview with this person, or recent investigations include this, and hyperlink to it. Give enough words that it still makes sense, even if someone doesn't click through. Or, go, I focus on interviews where I find people by searching through Facebook groups, or whatever it is. Tell me how you do it, or give examples of what you do. Or another example is, rather than just saying you work on scheduling social media across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, maybe you tell me what platforms that you schedule on, or go, actually in 6 months I've increased reach by this, or, we've got 30% more followers. And, I think percentages are a good way to hide if the numbers are actually quite small, but it's actually just thinking about how you can give some real examples in there. So when someone's kind of looking through those bullet points, I'd say you probably want a max of 4 or 5 bullet points in it, and you want quite a few of those to be actually kind of examples of what you're doing, not just saying, I schedule content. What content do you schedule? What results have you had? Not just, I write things. What things have you written? So I think just really kind of working that into the bullet points is really important.
And the point about, do some employers use scanning software for keywords? Some might not. But at the end of the day, it's going to get to a human eventually. And so I don't think you still, whatever you are writing, want to make sure that actually the application still reads like you've written it for a human, rather than doing a kind of keyword stuffing kind of exercise. And if they are using some sort of scanning software, they're probably not searching for things like Microsoft Word or Adobe or things like that in your CV. They'll be looking for skills or things like that.
The other thing I would add on to that is that, while I would say probably less use scanning software than you think, maybe they do, maybe they don't, there is a strong chance that it will go to someone in HR before it goes to someone who is actually the editor, or the person who will be kind of, ultimately deciding who you get that role. So I would definitely say, yes, write it like it goes to a human being. But I would also say, do pay a lot of attention to what they are looking for in that job description, because that HR person, especially if it's a bigger organization, will be looking at a huge range of CVs, and will not necessarily be an expert in all of them. So we'll want to know that you tick the box because you write some pieces, or you know how to write, or you know how to use social media, or whatever it is. So I would say, do think about making sure that it's clear that you hit the points, but you don't have to kind of write that in a kind of this word hits a box kind of way, if that makes sense. And then finally, I think before we move on to, Jack's going to talk to you a little bit about cover letters, and then we will take some more questions if anyone has any further things to ask around that kind of application process. Well, these are my, I think, 3 golden rules. 1, is it personalized? 2, is it just 1 page? And is it really easy to read and see why you should hire me? Those are, I think, your 3 key questions that you always want to just be looking back at if you are you've got that CV in front of you for a role. I'm just going to show you these really quickly because I'm aware we've already done an hour. We've got a bit more to go, and I know there was kind of 1,000,001 questions. But here are just a couple of examples of CVs that we've been kind of sent, which I think to a certain extent kind of, prove the point. The one on the left is from Fraser, who now works, it was the CV that got him his job at FE Week. And previous to that, he had worked at a local newspaper. So again, you can kind of see how that really kind of worked for him in terms of an entry-level route. But I think it's a really good example of, you can see just how much of this is dedicated to here's examples of what I've done, here are links, here's why.
Look at those links. There's so many links in that CV.
So many links, and kind of explaining why these links are relevant to this job that he's applying for, which is a little bit more of a specialism. And the other thing I think which is great about the CV, you go down to the University of Kent where he did politics. Actually, the whole of the explanation about what he did at University of Kent is actually about his student newspaper, because he knows that no one cares that he did politics. That was, you know, many years ago at this point. Even when he applied, you can see it, I don't know when this was, but it was only a couple of years after uni, but he is very aware that what they care about is what he's done. So I think it's a really great example to kind of back this up. And yeah, this got him both the interview and the job. The second example I've pulled out here as well, I think is really interesting from a kind of just how little space is given to the education. You can literally see it at the bottom. It's one line. It says I did an MA. That's it. Everything else is work experience. So I think that really, again, gives you perspective of how much you should be giving to your experience. Or like, you know, it doesn't have to be this many kind of things. You know, there are 6 bits of experience here. No one's necessarily expecting you to have 6 bits of experience, but I'd rather you fleshed out, you know, what you did for your own blog and that week you did on work experience into 2 really kind of nice bits with bullet points and spending loads on your education. And also there's some examples again at the top of recent work. So I think these are 2 interesting ones to think about. And then a final one I wanted to show you, which was one of mine over here. This is one I did for Time Out a little while ago. And this is maybe the one example in which I'd say that funny design can work, because I basically made it look exactly like the first page of Time Out and made my CV basically look exactly like that. And they said that was why I got the interview. But this only works because you really went for it. So if you're going to do a design, like really kind of have a reason for it and do it properly. Like I had to go out and buy a ruler, and my flatmate was like, what are you doing? Why are you measuring how long like the comment box is in Time Out? But there was a reason for me doing that CV, and it kind of was executed well. So you absolutely don't need to do anything like this. And if design is, you know, there just for it being a bit pretty, not so important, but there can be times when you might want to do something like this.
So CV is part 1. The next thing that you're going to want to do is look at your cover letters. And so we've got a bit of an exercise for you. This register was the job that I applied for when I joined Lego about 3.5 years ago. I want you to put in the chat how you think you would start a cover letter for a job like this. You've fired up Google Docs, you've got it there ready to go. What is your first sentence? What are you reaching for kind of immediately? I'll give you a few minutes to kind of tap something into the chat box as a kind of wild idea. And I've already headed up it. I've headed up the title nicely already. That's there. That's like ready for you.
This one might take a bit longer because you've got to write a sentence.
Well, you've got to think. That's the thing, isn't it? Nobody thought they were going to be here writing cover letters at 10 past 7. That's a great start. Introduce your name, current role, how you find the job, where I found the opportunity, why I'm particularly interested in it.
No ideas about ideas. So chuck anything you want into the chat, as long as it's relevant to the cover letter.
Yeah, good time. Put in a name drop potentially. Cool. Well, so relevant experience, explain what you applied for a role. So this is the top of my cover letter that I applied for that 3.5 years ago. And it's kind of very different to the suggestions that you put in the chat. I wanted to stress that as a grown adult, I was still a massive fan of the brand and was lucky enough to have found or to ask my mum to find a picture of the sheer amount of Lego that I had in my room when I was a 9-year-old kid. And I think this really leans into a lot of what we were talking about where it comes to CVs. If someone has 200 bits of paper to go in, to go through, what is the thing that is going to get them to stick in their head and take someone to an interview? And for me, I think this was it. It was a picture of me as a 9-year-old, and it was me explaining what that picture was and why that moment as a 9-year-old was still important to me, because it was still important to the job. And if I showed you the job description that they were looking for, most of Lego standard job descriptions also talk about that need for creativity and the company wanting to feel more like a family. What you'll notice though as well is very quickly, this is the top third of an A4 piece of paper. I also talked about all of that kind of serious stuff that you might have said, what I do for a job. There are literally 3 links there showing the kinds of pieces of content that I've managed, and also stressing that I work with a wider team. It's not just me, and so what I felt personally is, if to that going what we were talking about with CVs, if you covered up the bottom 2/3 of a cover letter, I still think this would have got me an interview in reality. And even if that's all they saw, that would have been enough to be like, okay, well, we should go and meet this person overall. And what we really want to stress from your cover letter side of things is, if you're applying for a journalist role, treat it like you're writing a story. What is the thing at the top that is going to grab a reader? What is the thing that is actually the most important thing that people need to get? And what is the thing that they will remember? Because you only have, potentially about 30 seconds or a few seconds to really kind of leave a memory on someone who's going through a mountain of CVs. And so doing something a bit unique in that space helps you to kind of rise to the top, I guess.
Yeah, you've kind of covered, I think, the main kind of point I think that you want to kind of also get across here, that just think how many CVs start with "my name is Jem and I'm applying for the role," or something, a variation of that. You definitely wouldn't want to, you wouldn't be applying, you probably wouldn't be applying for a job at the Times with a picture of you reading the Times. But what I guess we're getting at here is match the style of the application to the company just as well. This won't work for every job. Some jobs are dream jobs, some jobs are more informal than others. So you wouldn't write that exact Lego CV for every job.
But you would personalize it.
But you would personalize it. And there is potentially a more interesting way in than "my name is X and I'm applying for." So think about what that in is. Is it, what are you bringing to them? What stories could you kind of, bring? How long have you read that paper? If it's your local paper, have you been reading this since you were do you remember your mum reading it, when you were younger? Just think about kind of that story of why you want to get the job, and make this kind of letter actually a story and kind of match that style, to the application. Again, I probably said this quite a lot when we were talking about CVs, but definitely a hard limit of 1 page. Again, as Jack kind of said, it's even just about that top 1/3 of the page. That's where you've really got to sell someone. But I would say you probably want that introduction paragraph, then up to 2 paragraphs of in-depth examples, and then you kind of want to wrap up. And the other thing I would say here is that you are never going to hit all of the points that are in a job description. Your job in a cover letter is to kind of go, which ones am I kind of strongest on, and which ones do I think they think are most important? And I think when you're looking at a job description, you can tell which ones they think are most important because they're the bullet points closer to the top. And then just pick 1 or 2 or 3 of those that you actually have some really in-depth examples to go for. And, they're never going to expect you to hit all of the bullet points in one cover letter. You'll probably do a worse job of explaining how you hit those bullet points if you're trying to just cram everything in. But, really kind of honing in on a couple of specific examples.
And also that kind of point slightly in the middle that says, don't talk about why this job would be great for you. Think about what you would bring to the job. It's something very simple, but but it's something that is almost always overlooked. People talk about in their cover letters why this opportunity would be amazing for you or how it would further your career or something like that. Whereas the hiring manager is really just looking for who can do this job for me, or who can do this job for a company. And that's something that really can very easily set you apart. Think of writing it in a way that potentially already puts you in the job in some way, or shows what you could contribute already. And we'll go on to some talk about how you can help set yourselves apart there with some ideas in a moment. And if you are being told to apply by email, put the cover letter in the email. Like, don't make it any harder for that hiring manager already has. Don't make them open a second application or a second file. Just put the cover letter in the email itself.
Yeah, and again, it sounds like one of those really simple, kind of really basic things, but when I was that person going through 200 applications, sure, it only takes, and people go, oh, it takes you 30 seconds to open it. 30 seconds on 200 applications is actually a really long time. That's 100 minutes. That's like an hour and a half. So like, do just make it as easy as possible, and always apply the way they tell you to. And if it is by email, you want them to open it and just be hit by how brilliant you are. That's basically like what you're aiming for. And again, I know that this sounds like the most basic of things around double checking spelling and names, but again, the last kind of round of hiring I did, I would say about 10% of people will spell either my name wrong, or they spelled the company's name wrong. And I try and be quite generous with these kind of things, because if someone's really great, and I'll try and kind of look past a typo, which is fairly easy to do. But ultimately, you have to remember, if someone is wading through a lot of job applications and they all are pretty good, they've got to find some way of choosing. So do make sure that you kind of double check those things as well. On the who to address the cover letter to thing, the other thing, quickly before I'm sure Jack's got actually kind of proper advice, would be don't ever start with just dear sir. Those I genuinely just put in the bin, where people assume that it could only possibly be a man that runs the company. I sometimes tend to do, I think, dear sir and madam is fine, or if I specifically know who's hiring, I might say dear so and so, and I always tend to include and the rest of the hire. So I would say like dear Jack and the hiring team, because you don't know that they're going to be the only person kind of looking at it. I don't know.
I mean, on the example of my cover letter there, I didn't say hello or dear sir or anything like that. I just kind of started. And I think maybe there's a little bit of a distinction when the cover letter is in an email. When a cover letter is in an email, you probably do need to do a little bit of formality around like hello, or something like that. But if your cover letter is just a PDF attachment that you've uploaded to some web portal somewhere, it can just read as a piece of paper would. It doesn't, just because it has letter in the title doesn't mean it literally has to be a letter. And to Jem's point, not including that, if you are just uploading it to a web portal somewhere, avoids you potentially doing the clangor of only assuming that a man could be doing the hiring process.
And I think this also ties back to the idea of like personalize it to where you're working. One of my first ever paid journalism job was kind of like a part-time editor role for Save the Student, and as part of the application process it was like, send us your favorite meme about boats, and so I know from that kind of both their website and the application process that this was a very informal kind of company culture to work for. So I was just like, hey Jake, here's my letter. Never met the bloke, but it was very clear from that application process that that's what they were about. So I think you can kind of look at the place. If it seems like their content is fairly informal, they're like targeted to a Gen Z millennial audience, like that's the way that they kind of write, it's fine to say hello or hi or whatever. If there's something like the Times and the Telegraph and it is in that kind of body of the email, you might just want to say dear sir, madam, or to whom it may concern. I would say it's tied to that, but not something I'd necessarily stress about, as long as you kind of don't put your foot in it, if that makes sense.
So that is broadly what we have to say on cover letters and CVs. I don't know if you have any further questions that are burning in your mind. I know we've had quite a few kind of while we've been chatting, but we're more than happy to answer like any more that you have like at this particular moment in time when it comes to like writing a CV or writing a cover letter or anything like that can kind of help. I'm really interested as well if anyone had that Microsoft Word template for their CV and is now like furiously hiding it or like throwing it into the bin. So it's a safe space here. If you want to confess that you use that template, you're also more than welcome.
So what we've got coming up still, and thank you all so much for kind of like, bearing with us so far. I know we've basically nearly done 90 minutes now, but we've got a little bit more about kind of how to bring an idea into your application. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of experience and how you can make that for yourself, because we've had a lot of questions in recently around like lack of, work experience opportunities, or, if I haven't necessarily studied this or done that, how can I do that? And then we'll kind of take some final questions at the end. So I think we'll probably move on and talk a little bit around this importance of always coming with an idea. So this is, I would say, something which I, again, a bit like show don't tell, is something that I feel really quite passionate about, because I see so few people doing it. I also know that this also exists at all layers of journalism applications. A friend of mine works at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, was hiring for one of their reporter roles, and said that out of the dozens and dozens of people that applied, only 7 actually came with an idea for a story that they might want to do for this reporter role. And it's an investigative reporter role, you probably should come with some ideas. And so I would really, really strongly say that like having an idea is a really like easy-ish way to make you stand out in a job application. Like, could be an idea, it could be suggesting some improvements. And the other thing I wanted to kind of stress at this point is this doesn't have to be a good idea. Like, it doesn't have to be something that you're going to do. You're not going to turn up at this job and actually do it. You probably never do it. It just kind of needs to be in the right ballpark. And I think one of the things an idea actually shows is that you actually, like, it has so many levels to it. It shows that you understand the outlet. It shows you've looked at what they do. You kind of are thinking about how you could bring something to them. And so it's a really kind of good way of actually going, I've not just been proactive and come to you with something, but I understand what you're about. I see where you're going. I've got kind of, a couple of suggestions about where we could be going. And so few people do it, that it really is, I would say, one of the easiest ways to kind of make yourself stand out. And, no one is expecting a fully formed person. What they're looking for is potential. So I think this is one of those, again, areas where it doesn't have to be a perfect idea. It's just that you've actually come with a bit of enthusiasm and they know you're going to be the person at the table in the conference who's going to go, hey, we thought about this. What about that? In terms of where you kind of put them, I would say cover letter is probably, if you haven't specific, a lot of job applications nowadays will be asking for ideas, but I would say, working them into your kind of cover letter is pretty standard, easy way to do it. You can, when you're talking about your previous experience, for example, you say, I covered this at my student paper, or, I did this at my related job. You can then very easily jump on to go, and this is something I'd like to bring to you by exploring this or this. Or when you say, I have experience in scheduling social media, you can, again, it's a very easy jump to say, and I'd love to bring this to you and help you improve X, Y, and Z around your social media.
You can also, if you're applying through some sort of hideous online portal, there may be space to upload kind of extra supporting materials sometimes. But the thing we bear in mind is that like those supporting materials may get separated from your actual cover letter and your CV and may never even be looked at potentially. And so putting them somewhere that, or slipping them in somewhere that is more likely to be viewed is probably the best suggestion.
And just giving enough kind of signposting that it might be, as you say, that you might want to kind of, if you've got a pitch for an idea, maybe you upload that as a separate kind of bit or put it under your cover letter, but at least signpost it. Be like, when I did this health investigation at my student paper, which I think would work really great for you, and we do it like this, you can see more in the pitch kind of below. So just making sure that in every point they have an entry point to that idea. And Jack's actually got a couple of examples of these are a bit kind of more fully formed, because I think these were ideas where you were able to kind of upload a kind of section, because in some job applications it's like anything else you want to add. So these are just a couple that Jack was going to kind of talk through.
So the middle one was for a job that I applied for at Vox about 6 or 7 years ago, I think. The job was something like short form editor, and the application itself, like the job description that they put, was pretty vague, and they had generally set it up and said, we don't really know what we want to produce, but we want to look for someone who knows how to kind of create small nuggets of content. And so as part of my application, I pitched them a thing called Vox Pop, which was 6 or 7 years ago, an idea of kind of putting each of these on the website and having kind of small little nuggets of news down a kind of sidebar within their kind of site itself. I got through to like a second stage and mucked up massively after that, but that's a completely different story. But the point being is that I probably with this one through the kitchen sink at it, did a full kind of mock-up and things like that. You don't have to go as far as doing something as intense as that if it's not warranted. But what I felt when I read the job description was that they didn't really know what they wanted. And so coming with something that was a bit more in-depth was probably what they were looking for. The one on the left is part, again, of my Lego application many years ago, where I needed to give, it was part of the second or third interview I think I went through. I had to give kind of a degree of presentation and present some ideas. So in this case, I was specifically asked for them, and I kind of mocked up something that involved kind of an animated mini figurehead. I never did this idea when I was in the job. I never really saw it ever again. I think often when you get into the job itself, you realize the kind of realities of working in organizations and why that silly idea you had 6 months ago was wildly impractical. But the point is that I had one and I tried to put something together, and it's not perfect. It was fairly terrible. But the point is that it shows intuition, and it shows that you're willing to try something and try something that's a bit different, and that is the kind of key in that respect.
And the final one on the right,
on the right.
It's been a long day. The final one on the right is one of mine. I applied to a role with Sifted, and as part of that, I kind of made some suggestions around their Instagram account. I thought their Instagram account was really boring. They just had loads of pictures with a couple of bits of text over it, and I was like, you know what, guys, you have this amazing pink branding. Why aren't you using the pink branding? And I think the idea I'd pitched them for a story as part of this application. They didn't get the job. I'm working full time for JL right now, so can't do two things, can you? But the idea that I kind of pitched them was this story around when will vegan and veggie kind of meats stop trying to taste like meat, if that makes sense. It was a kind of story about when will businesses actually start marketing kind of protein foods just as protein and not as meat replacements. And tied in with that, I just really wanted to actually show them, you've got this great branding, look at this cool thing we could make to go with the story. And I just wanted to kind of really visualize it. So yeah, that was one of mine. And literally that was the kind of just one small kind of mock-up that I made of this image with their kind of striking branding, and this idea of actually let's kind of make a veggie burger just out of vegetables. And obviously, all of these three examples are a lot more fully formed than I would say what we're necessarily suggesting you should do. But we kind of picked these three because otherwise it's quite difficult to explain to you what the ideas we kind of actually pitched before.
There are no rules. If you want to go and create a full mock-up of something for your application, you can. If you think it warrants it and you're personalizing your application to the outlet that you're applying for, that is equally fine.
Yeah, and you can kind of go either way. You can go all full this way. Sometimes it might not. I just want to stress, sometimes it might not be that you have to go this far. If it's a story idea that you're pitching, you could potentially work that into your cover letter. You might want to go this far, you might not, but whatever it is, have some hints of ideas or constructive criticism of what they might kind of want to do next. And just bring something to the table, and the chances are you're never going to do it, even if you get the job, because you'll realize why they didn't do it. It's because resources stretched, or maybe they tried it and it didn't work out, or whatever it is. But just coming with some kind of idea, really, no one does it, even if it's just 2 lines in your cover letter where you're like, hey, I think you should try Instagram Reels. That's already kind of putting you above everyone who hasn't come with any idea. So whether it's a couple of lines in your cover letter, whether you've mocked something up, I can honestly say, I think from a hiring perspective, for me, this is what makes, the biggest difference. And then just finally, to kind of close off before we've got a couple of kind of, last extra tips almost, just some kind of ideas on how to find ideas.
Yeah.
It's a bit Inception, isn't it? Because it can seem really daunting to go, okay, how am I gonna find ideas for this? So here are just a few that we kind of came up with very late last night, so hopefully there's no typos. Think about a really easy one, I would say, is thinking about what channels they aren't utilizing properly on social media, and how you could improve them. I typically say look to the latest releases. Like, newsrooms typically don't have endless resource, so the chances are new things like Instagram Reels, even TikTok, even though it is, several years old now, many newsrooms won't be utilizing those things. So have a look at their social media channels. There will always be suggestions I think you could make there around kind of newer kind of parts of the app, or different ways they could kind of be doing something as a kind of quite a simple way to make a constructive criticism that shows you've kind of really kind of understood their content. Also, if you're thinking about stories, just go and look what they did a couple of months ago and think about how they could move it on. This is a typical kind of one for local papers that I was kind of told about, is that, what did they cover a month ago, 2 months ago, even a year ago? Look at what kind of has done well, and kind of just some pieces that you found interesting, and we're like, okay, I know that they liked this piece because they published it. How could I move this piece on and make the next iteration of this story? Or how could I do this piece in a different way? If they've interviewed someone who is the local person who launched a trampoline club in lockdown, you could find a case study of someone who did an ice skating club, or whatever it is. That they like that story because it's been published, and you're just thinking of a way to do it differently or move it on. Equally, if there's things that you've done either as student media or as your own blog or whatever it is, you could talk about how you could bring that to them. So perhaps you've run your own Instagram account and you ran a kind of really successful campaign around something. Maybe you did a load of FOIs into something that your university did, and you can kind of say in your cover letter, here's an example of a really successful story or a campaign I did. I'd modify this and bring this to you. Equally, another, I think, really important thing, especially for the media, as I said, London-centric, very heavily of the same demographic a lot of the time, is also kind of pointing out to them what demographics they aren't reaching at the moment and how you could help them do that, and just kind of going, what you do is really great and I love it, but here's how we could actually get younger people reading it. How we could getting people outside of London reading your content. So again, signaling that you understand what they're about, and here's how you can kind of reach more people. And I think all of these, aren't necessarily, they don't have to be big grand ideas, but they do show that you really understand what they're doing and can help you kind of, move them on. And finally, looking at what their competitors are doing well that maybe they're not doing. Maybe their competitor has launched a podcast and you can go, okay, well, you wouldn't want to do exactly the same thing, but what could we do with audio? Or, if it's a local, it might not be a competitor in the same space, but maybe you might have seen, a similar size of outlet in a different industry doing something that's quite interesting that you might want to bring in. And again, just showing that you kind of, understand the landscape. And yeah, it doesn't have to be a big idea, it doesn't have to be grand, it could be, it could not. I just think all of these things, I think, show that you really understand the outlet, the landscape, and that you've got something to bring, I think, fundamentally.
Do you have any questions about ideas or anything like that? Or, we've kind of answered, I guess, where to put them or how to put them, but has that kind of sparked any particular thoughts or anything like that? And if not, we can shuffle on to some final thoughts.
Yeah, we've been talking at you a lot, so I won't begrudge if anyone has any final questions. I would say we have done.
Just wants to have their tea.
Awesome. Okay, should we move on to, there was actually one question that I wanted to go back to, which kind of came in a little bit earlier. I've lost my mouse now. I think it was whether references and recommendations you think are worthwhile in CV and cover letters. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think it depends who they're from. If they're from your teacher from 20 years ago, probably not. If they're from someone at the company like that you work with, potentially, but I think it really depends on the context of whether you think they are impressive. I think this really goes back to what you are what Jen was talking about around personalizing your CV and personalizing your cover letter to the application itself. They shouldn't just be there because they shouldn't be there on every application that you do. They should be there if the particular skills are relevant, or the particular quote is relevant to the work it did. But the other thing I would say is if they're not, if someone doesn't know the person, it could be anyone that they're reading that quote from.
I think generally I err on, unless there's an exceptionally good reason to, I think your experience speaks better than someone saying that you're good at something. You can just show them what you've done rather than have someone else kind of say it for you. There will obviously be exceptions to that, and you can kind of, tailor it if you're applying for it. We listed an example. We listed a job yesterday, for example, at Time Out for a commercial role where you write features for like brands. That might be an occasion where you might want to have a quote from someone saying this is the funniest brand piece that I've ever kind of seen. There will be kind of examples, but I would say generally I'd err on the side of not. Question in, if you haven't written for a while, how do you get back into writing good quality content? So we've talked obviously a bit about how you want your cover letter to be a bit like a story and you want it to read well. How do you get back in? I mean, you hate writing, so
in general. Well, I guess the thing I would say is that nobody is stopping you from writing. Like you don't need permission to go and write anywhere yourself. That writing that you do could be on your own site about the thing that you are really passionate about. You could be doing that as a weekly Twitter thread about something. Good content is good content, and it doesn't really matter what platform it's on, as what the hiring manager or what the HR person is looking for when they're going through an application is your potential to fill the role. It's not necessarily that you have to have done the exact thing that you want that you want at that point. So I think that for me is the question of, is it a bit of a case of I would implore you to try and almost make your own opportunity and keep it sustainable and keep it consistent. I think if you're talking about habits that you want, you don't want to kind of overexert yourself and say, I'm going to, go set up a whole thing and write a thing every day or something like that. You're really just looking for, a certain amount of content that is going to make your CV look okay. If your CV has 3 or 4 links in it and you feel like you only have 2 or 3 at the moment, go and write some stuff or create some stuff yourself that you feel is worthy of being on that CV.
And we're going to come on to this in a little bit around kind of like how long you should give yourself to apply for jobs, but we definitely see a kind of like bell curve. I think both of us have seen it in job application processes which we have run, whereby all of the people that you kind of have who apply within the first 2 or 3 days have clearly rushed, and it's just chuck it all in, like, here, go, before it goes away. The people that give themselves a couple of days, they give themselves a weekend, they actually kind of spend the time on doing it, are the people that generally actually kind of put together a good application. So the thing I would say is don't feel that you have to rush as much as you think to get a job application in. So if you're worried about making sure your cover letter does read well, it's very unlikely that a job application will close. If it's open on a Friday, it's not going to close until the Monday, for example, like if you're worried about closing early. But I would say do give yourself the time. Don't feel you have to see it and do it in one day. Like, do kind of make sure you work in a bit of time to do that. One final question, and then we've got some final tips to kind of give you. Someone's asked around, how do you personalize an application if it's on LinkedIn Easy Apply and it's very limited, not in depth? Would you recommend emailing the editor separately? So there are 2 things I would say to that. One is that while LinkedIn Easy Apply exists, I think it's very rare that there isn't kind of another option.
Yeah.
I would always say apply how they tell you to apply. So if LinkedIn Easy Apply is what they're directing you from their website, I would say just do that, because otherwise you're putting yourself in a pile where no one is going to actually look at it. However, I very, very rarely see a job which is only listed on LinkedIn Apply and isn't also listed on either another job site that has an email listed, or is most likely on the company website itself, where there are actually some more kind of in-depth questions, or they tell you to apply another way. I think sometimes it just gets turned on as a setting they don't necessarily want. So I think my advice would be, you see a job you really like, it's on LinkedIn, you can apply. I would first off go to their actual website or their kind of career social media handles and see kind of what they're kind of promoting there. More often than not, you will see there's another way to apply. But if that is all pointing to LinkedIn apply, I would say ultimately, while there is probably less chance of personalization, I'd say you probably don't want to risk being put in a pile that's never going to be read. Cool. And I promise we are on our final thoughts now. We said it would be about 2 hours, so I think we've kind of hit the brief. So a couple of final thoughts. I don't know if you want to do the first few, Jack, and then I can take you in a bit.
Apply, like, less is more. You don't have to be applying for absolutely everything, and you should take time over the ones for every application that you do. It should take you a long time, because you need to personalize that CV, you need to personalize that cover letter for every application. It's a literal waste of your time to take the same CV and to just fire it off to 10 different places in that way, because you're not going to get that opportunity unless you're actually tailoring your application to the job that they want. Ultimately, that company is looking to fill a hole in their organization, and you need to like fit that criteria in order to go for it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've kind of already kind of talked around this a bit. Like, there is definitely is a kind of rush at the beginning for people who just want to chuck stuff in. There is some really quality ones at the beginning tailoring off to the end, and then you also get another rush at the end. So I would say do give yourself the time to work on it properly. And I think also we've obviously spent a lot of this event saying, like, you know, here are things that you might want to apply for that aren't grad schemes. There might be some great grad schemes that you want to apply for, but pick the 2 that you really do want to apply for. We had some people earlier saying, you know, and you're obviously machines because you've applied for like so many, but you'll probably find it less of a kind of trudge if you actually pick the 2 or 3 that you really want to apply for. Just focus on them, and the same goes for all kind of jobs. Just pick the things that you do want to apply for and spend a bit of time for it. I'd say generally at least an evening. And the other thing I would say about things which aren't grad schemes is they won't ask as much for you, much of you in that kind of application process. They'll just be looking for a cover letter and a CV, whereas when you're applying for a grad scheme, it's like, you know, running a marathon and cooking a cake at the same time. And just don't feel that you can't ask for help. You know, I always get at least 2 friends to kind of look over and stuff, just sense check it and find my typos. I'm bad at typos, happens all the time. So, you know, don't feel that you can't ask people for help in that kind of instance. I think we have 3 more points, and then we'll kind of take some final questions.
Show, don't tell. If you take one thing away, and actually it'd be really interesting to go and, you know, maybe look back at your CVs and your cover letters and see whether there are, you know, examples in your existing applications where you have just told people what you do rather than showing people what they do and backing it up with data or examples and things like that.
And just kind of on that, as a little bit of a like add-on as well, I would say definitely do. I know Jack said it's useful to perhaps go back and look at what you've submitted already. Always save what you've submitted already. I have a folder dating back about like 4 or 5 years to basically every job I have ever applied for. I've kept in Google Drive. I kept the CV and I kept the cover letter, and I had a little notebook where I used to kind of write down everything that I'd applied for and how far I got with it. And I know that might sound like a really demoralizing thing to do if you're like, hang on, I'm not getting any of these. But actually, when you look back, like, you know, you've had a month's worth of applications and you're kind of like, okay, let's see what worked and what didn't. You can actually start to pick out what happened, what worked well and what didn't work well. So I would definitely find a system that works for you. I typically just stick it all in a Google Drive and maybe have a spreadsheet. It might be that you want a Trello board or something completely different, but do keep it all and do kind of have a look back and be like, what did work? Why didn't this one get through? And I think once there's been a bit of distance and a bit of space, I think you can kind of be like, okay, well, maybe that's why that didn't work for that.
Yeah, it's less cringy if you kind of give it some time, I think, more than anything else. And you can make your own experience as much as anything else, is what I was saying. You know, it can be your own podcast or your own website, or it can be your own Instagram account. It can be, or your own TikTok account. Like, you're only looking to, with that CV, to show like willing and creativity and inspiration and to get yourself into that interview stage. And so actually doing something that, you know, creating your own experience is a really good example. And there's a question there about in the chat about approaching publication for like work experience, and I guess that's another thing that we can cover in a mo. But it's not necessarily the end of the world if you haven't got that actual work experience in a newsroom already, because that's not the only thing that's going to unlock.
And I think especially at the moment, a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to do that and physically go into a newsroom over the last 18 months. There is a lot of value to be, and we'll talk a little bit about that question about how to kind of approach them for work experience, because there is a lot of value. If that is kind of the stage you're at, you will gain a lot from that, but equally you can create that kind of experience. Jack kind of touched on it earlier, but the reason that he got his first job at Metro was because he'd built an iPad app for his student paper. I mean, it might not have to be something, you know, as techie as that, but just actually doing something and treating it professionally really does kind of make a big difference. One of the people that we hired on the Journo Resources Fellowship last year, Heather, runs her own website around people with kind of I don't quite know how to say it. It's all about kind of different types of relationships and kind of relationships outside of the norm of kind of two couples who happen to be, you know, a man and a woman. And she is the only person running it, but treats it so professionally. She kind of looks at how the stats are working. And for us, that was kind of one of the things we were like, this is amazing. This woman runs this outlet by herself. And that was just out of her going, okay, I want to cover relationships outside of the, you know, stereotypical norm. I'm going to create this website. I'm just going to post a piece. And, you know, there wasn't like a set schedule. She wouldn't necessarily be posting stuff every day, but was treating it professionally. And I mean, I guess in a and perhaps a bigger example, I literally started Journo Resources as something that I just made as a kind of side project hobby in my bedroom. Kind of grew out of control. Now it's my job, but that could have equally have been something that helped me get a job. You know, I think it's definitely helped me get full-time kind of jobs in the past when I was the and I think also you just don't know how much that stuff can kind of help you. I used to be a kind of student volunteer for the Student Publication Association, and I was told that was one of the things that actually got me my job as a news editor for a human rights website, because it meant that I'd actually had kind of experience of charity stuff, which was a thing that they covered a lot. So there's so many things that you could do which are kind of outside of that traditional newsroom experience. You just kind of have to treat them professionally and kind of, yeah, really go all in on it.
And then finally, you will get there, we promise. Like, there are good jobs out there. There are good jobs out there that people aren't applying for, as we showed you at the start. And also just remember that, like, no job is forever. We're going to be all working for a very, very long time before we end up, you know, retiring to a yacht somewhere or something like that. And so just because you maybe don't get that initial thing that you really, really wanted just out of graduating doesn't mean you're not going to get it eventually. And maybe your career path takes you in a direction that you're not a big fan of initially. You can change it. You can change industry. You can change, you know, where you're working in the world. There are plenty of opportunities out there, but you just need, you know, and you will find the one that you want eventually. But equally, it may also change. You may find yourself in that perfect job that you want initially, and actually realize that it's maybe not exactly for you, you know, at some point down the line. So think about it on a more long-term basis. And I understand there's often a lot of pressure when you do just graduate to feel like you need to be in a job kind of straight away, or be in the dream job that you want straight away. But you will get there.
And I think the other thing I would just finally add on to that is, I think the main thing that we wanted to show you with those entry level jobs at the beginning is you are all good enough, you have all got enough stuff that you can apply for that kind of stuff already. You don't have to. I think a lot of the time when people kind of think that they can only go for a job with trainee at the start of it is because you're like, I am just starting out, maybe that's the only entry level role. And you know, I think any job when you start it takes about 3 months to actually work out what you're doing. So like, even if you apply for that job, get it, and go, oh my god, what have I done? That's just part of getting a new job. So I think the main thing I would also say to take away from this is that you can apply for those things. Like, you can see that hardly anyone is applying for those things. It doesn't matter that it doesn't have trainee at the start of it. And quite often, you know, even just reading all the way down to the end of the job description, I see a lot of times in kind of, it's only like the final couple of parts where they go, you know, this is an entry level role, or they go, you know, we would consider an exceptional kind of level kind of trainee. So also kind of, yeah, to take that away as well.
Yeah.